Welcome to the One World Quickfire Debates, brought to you by Concern Worldwide. I'm Emma Hazard, Public Engagement Officer for Concern Worldwide, and I'm delighted to host today's debate. The motion we will be looking at is businesses who profited from lockdown should be taxed more. Proposing the motion, we have Mark Francos, who is currently studying international business law at Queen's University, Belfast. And to oppose the motion, we have Gillian McKee, a sustainability consultant, having spent over 2 decades working in business in the community. Both are adjudicators for the Concern Worldwide Post-Primary Debates programme, so today will be a chance for them to see debating from the other perspective. So without much further ado, I invite Mark to start today's debate, proposing that businesses who profited from lockdown should be taxed more. Thank you.
So it's an absolute pleasure to propose a motion today on something that is ever so topical and crucial to how we approach business in these times of uncertainty, as we ultimately continue to battle COVID-19 as a society. Today, I propose the motion that businesses who profited from lockdown should be taxed more. Now, I can imagine the shock and horror that may emerge from my opposition today at such a thought, but we must look at this clearly and objectively. This motion targets those who profited, and I would say profited to an excessive level from the human tragedy that was COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdowns we've endured. This motion does not target the likes of our corner shops or the local takeaway that signed up to Just Eat just to continue delivering its services. Unfortunately, as we all know, our hospitality sector, our high streets, our cultural attractions, amongst many others, all closed. Many, yes, receiving support in the form of rates reductions or furlough support, but ultimately lockdown changed the market substantially. Many businesses had to close their doors while others remained open. Now, we can debate the merits of this till the cows come home, but ultimately that isn't what this is all about. This motion to me strikes at the heart of what is morally right. Businesses who profited from lockdown should be taxed more, because if we fail to do so, well, we promote the thought that profiting from suffering is good, and profiting from, well, let's be real, profiting from an unfair playing field is completely immoral. Now, I will not tell you profit is a bad thing. We need businesses to make profit, to reinvest into their workforce, into their own expansion, and yes, for their shareholders. But when an online clothes retailer, the likes of Boohoo, for instance, sees their sales revenue go up by 40% during the pandemic, and then barely sees a change to its gross margins, we must question whether that business retaining all of its profits in a disrupted market is okay. Now, a fair argument to make would be that business always has to adjust to external changes and challenges, and that those who adapt best and quickest should profit from that fact. However, like I outlined earlier, many businesses were forced to shut on the high street, yet their competitors profited. Many times because those businesses that remained open were allowed to sell not just essential goods, but those that had been deemed not to be, whereas their competitors were forced to close. These, the likes of our supermarket retailers, did not suffer to the same degree as the rest of our economy, but them again adapting and taking the online market by storm, alongside being able to remain open in person. Certain retailers grew further. Amazon seeing record sales, and according to the New York Times, a nearly 200% rise in profits during 2020. That figure is based on figures that do not even include Christmas sales. So it's ultimately, I imagine, a lot higher. Now, Amazon is, of course, a special case. In the UK, it barely pays taxes at all. 492 million in direct taxation during 2020 on sales that rose 50% to over 20.5 billion pounds. You may argue, of course, well, it pays tax indirectly, and that's correct. However, the numbers still don't add up. Their indirect taxes did rise from just over 1 billion to almost 1.5 billion, but it still doesn't quite add up. The opposition couldn't fail to deny that the likes of Amazon should pay more. And ultimately, these are the people who this proposition is targeting. Over to you, Gillian.
Thank you, Mark. Why are we obsessed with punishing profit? Most of us are happy to live in a capitalist society where the markets dictate the cost of goods, and we can have whatever we desire, provided we have the means to pay. Whether it's strawberries in December or the latest iPhone on release day, an astonishing choice of goods is available to us in the high street, retail park, or at the touch of a button. That is in no small part due to a capitalist economy. It's a model that rewards innovation and creativity, whether that's in the design of the products and services or in their marketing. And this is a point that I think has been conveniently overlooked by those in favour of today's proposition. Perhaps if we worked harder to close the tax gap, which saw the UK government effectively losing some 35 billion in potential tax income in 2019-20, we might not see the need to increase tax for companies who profited during lockdown. Further tax measures could be the final straw for companies already feeling punished by Brexit and provide just the push they need to take their business and jobs overseas. Let's clarify which businesses we mean to include in our proposal. And I know Mark touched on this, but is it just the corporate megaliths like Netflix, Amazon, and Microsoft? What about the major supermarkets and the pharmaceutical companies? Should we be taxing the distilleries who turned their equipment and skills to making sanitizer when there was none to be had? Or the clothing manufacturers who swapped their designer patterns for more functional PPE for our health service? Whether they were responding to frontline emergency demands or offering practical or emotional support to those of us confined to our homes during lockdown, the companies who profited at that time all have one thing in common. They were meeting the needs and wants that prevailed in our society. That's how market forces work. If something isn't in demand, it's difficult to profit from selling it. If it is, you profit from making your offering bigger, better, cheaper, more alluring, or more accessible than your competitors. What we're missing here is that many companies actually saw the pandemic as a wake-up call for the much bigger crisis that we've been ignoring for some time. Climate change isn't coming, it's already here, but it's just now starting to be taken seriously, and companies that get that are placing sustainability at the heart of their operations. They're realizing that we can't just keep taking from nature as though her resources were infinite, and they're making sustainability their purpose, putting it at the heart of their operations. This is what we should be encouraging and supporting companies to do with their increased profits. It's a long-held belief of mine that what is important is not what a company does with its profits, but how it makes them. So why don't we work to reward those who can demonstrate better business? Let's encourage and support those that reduce their environmental impacts or invest some of their profits into local employment schemes or to support the resilience of local communities. Profit is not bad. Used responsibly and made sustainably, profit can do a great deal of good, and it should be encouraged, not punished. Also, let's not forget that plans have already been announced to increase corporation tax by 6% in 2023. So all companies will face a greater tax bill in 18 months' time, one that should add a further 12 billion to public expenditure for 2023-24. It will apply to all, however, and not just those who have been agile, flexible, and creative enough to run their business successfully and increase their profits by meeting market needs. That seems like a fairer approach to me. Over to you, Mark.
Well, I've got to say that was a very, very fair argument to make. And I just want to come back on just a few of those bits that I did notice. And I actually agree on a lot of those areas. I mean, talking about closing that tax gap, I mean, something that I didn't explicitly mention, but Amazon itself, we all know it doesn't pay huge amounts of tax. It's talking 500 million on profits, on gross revenues of 20 billion. Those numbers don't quite add up. So yes, closing the likes of those tax gaps is absolutely crucial. I mean, you could go through a whole plethora of companies and we'll be here all day, unfortunately. I agree, profit is not a bad thing. And tax on those who adjusted production is all very well and good. And I agree. Those who did make that adjustment, those who changed like from being blinds manufacturers into PPE suppliers, they should be congratulated. And I don't think they should be taxed accordingly on that. And I don't believe that they are, to be fair. I may not be 100% correct on that, however. But ultimately, I think what this motion comes down to is that matter of morality. I don't seek with this motion to have businesses pay through the nose to support their competitors. I just want them to pay their fair share when competitors were put out of business, essentially. What is morally unjust is that a lot of entities on the high street were forced to close, while the likes of those big supermarket retailers were allowed to flourish because, yes, they could still sell any goods essentially that they liked. We didn't take a market approach like the likes of the Welsh government did when they shut down within supermarkets, selling of books and clothes and things like that. Nor do I think that that was necessarily the right approach either. But we've got to question the morality of shutting down one shop and allowing another shop to flourish, because ultimately that's not really fair. And that kind of calls into question this whole argument, because it's a two-tier system that we've got in place. So really, the money that we should be taxing off people who made excessive profits in this regard should be allowed to be put back into that economy to help it recover in a balanced way, to help those entities which are struggling on that high street and to support our whole economy and to ensure that we actually have a competitive economy, not one in which these big multinational retailers call the shots, but one where everyone who profits pays their fair share to support those that who couldn't. Ultimately, it was out of a lot of people's control. Let's take back that control to ensure that people aren't left behind. Over to you, Gillian.
Thanks, Mark. When I was asked to take part in this debate, I have to be honest, I took some time to decide which side I wanted to argue for, because it's not straightforward. Yesterday, I put a poll on LinkedIn to see what other people thought. And interestingly, it was very close. Only 14 votes so far. 57% said no, they shouldn't be taxed. 43% said yes, they should. I know the Daily Express did a poll some time ago of its readers on the same question, and 61% felt that businesses should be taxed more, 39% that they shouldn't. So it's not a clear-cut issue. And I guess what it comes down to is whether or not you are in favour of a capitalist economy. And if you are, then the market forces that drive that have to be allowed to do what they do best. Another factor for me in deciding that they shouldn't is that I don't believe our government has actually spent much of the taxes that they've got wisely over the last year. I don't believe that the Eat Out to Help Out was a good initiative. It actually caused a further spike in COVID, and it cost the public purse £849 million, a lot more than was originally expected to cost. I'm also not in favour of the high street vouchers initiative that's currently out there. I understand that a lot of people really need that money and can use it and would spend it wisely, but I don't believe giving a blanket £100 to anyone and everyone, even those who really do not need it, is the best way to spend our taxes. So I think that the profits that companies make really should be encouraged to be invested in sustainability. We have a huge challenge ahead with climate change, and really we're only starting to address that now. And I think if companies can be encouraged to really look at their own sustainability and to put their profits to much broader social and environmental use, I think that's a better use of those profits than giving it to the government.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to come back at all, or I was just going to say.
Mark, if you want to say something, go ahead.
I was going to say that's actually very I agree in many ways. Thoroughly with what you've said. I think that we should be looking at a more sustainable model as to how we emerge back from this. I think the pandemic has highlighted to many of us that we really need to be looking as to how we move forward. Obviously, carbon emissions and the likes have massively decreased for a large period of the pandemic because people aren't obviously commuting. The changes to our economy have definitely benefited that in some have definitely benefited a fight back against the climate emergency. And I agree. I mean, we've got, if we want to have some form of capitalist economy, which I believe we should. Like, I'm not going to say that we should have a blanket change at all, but the question is, do we still need regulation in that regard? And that's where I think this comes into, because this is where choice applies fully, then you can allow everyone to have free reign. But the problem with this, and the problem and the angle I've tried to take on this, is that there was a lot of elements of there wasn't choice involved in a lot of this. A lot of people were forced to close, despite the fact that they wanted to continue, and not everyone had the capital to be able to reinvest, to be able to change their company, to maybe create PPE equipment, or to be able to sell online. And that's really where it comes to this. And this is where I think we should be taxing more from other businesses to allow our economy to re-flourish and to re-emerge in a balanced way, because I don't want an economy where we have just several multinational retailers running the show, because I don't think that's good for anyone.
Absolutely. I agree with a lot of your points as well, Mark, which is why I really don't think this is a straightforward black and white debate. I think the point about high streets and independent retailers and the struggles that they face, actually, I think that's been around for quite some time. Before the pandemic hit, it was the final nail in the coffin for many companies, certainly. I think there are pretty despicable companies out there, actually, who profited hugely and in a very immoral way by, for example, by charging £20 for a small bottle of sanitizer when you couldn't get sanitizer for love nor money. Those types of businesses are not sustainable in the long term. The market and public opinion will see that those companies do not have a long future. That's just not the way to do business. Mark's point about regulation is an important point, but I think if we can start by enforcing the law and regulation with all companies and make sure that they meet that they don't have tax havens, they don't have loopholes that they can use to get out of paying what they owe. I think that would be a good start, and that's where we should go first.
Thank you both, Mark and Gillian. That was a really, really interesting and engaging debate. I'm sure I can speak for everybody, but I certainly learnt a lot from both sides of the debate. And it was interesting that you almost both kind of came down to the same sort of issues that are important, which is sustainable and responsible business. And that is something which definitely fits within the theme of the One World Festival as a whole, where we're working towards a peaceful, sustainable and just world for everybody. So thank you once again for your time. Thank you for everybody for joining today. I do hope you enjoyed the debate as much as I did, and do remember to come back tomorrow for the final quickfire debate tomorrow at noon. Thank you and goodbye.